A woman stands abandoned at the altar, publicly humiliated for her body in front of an entire Kansas town. The man she was promised to rips apart her dignity with cruel laughter, leaving her with nothing but shame and a torn wedding dress. But what he doesn't know is that this moment of destruction will birth something far more dangerous than a broken bride. It will create a woman who refuses to disappear. This is the story of how the frontier tried to erase Abigail Harper, and how she burned it all down instead. Drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The church smelled like sweat and dying flowers. Abigail Harper stood at the front of the First Methodist Church of Abilene, Kansas, wearing a white dress that had cost her father 3 months of grain profit and fit her body like an apology. The lace pinched under her arms. The bodice crushed her ribs. She couldn't breathe properly, but that seemed appropriate somehow. She'd been holding her breath for weeks anyway, waiting for this day to either save her or finish her off completely. It was June 1874, and the heat was the kind that made men mean. Through the veil, she could see Robert Calloway standing near the Reverend, not quite at the altar yet, talking to someone in the front pew. He was laughing. That was fine. Robert laughed a lot. He was handsome in the way that men with money often are, not because of his face, but because of the confidence that came from never being told no. He owned a third of the cattle processing contracts in 3 counties. He had a house in town with actual glass windows. He wore a suit that didn't have patches. And for reasons Abigail still didn't entirely understand, he had asked her father for her hand. "You're a lucky girl," her mother had said, over and over, until the words stopped sounding like praise and started sounding like a warning. Abigail wasn't sure about lucky. But she was 27, which in 1874, Kansas made her a dry well in a town that valued women primarily for their ability to produce children and keep quiet. Her father's farm was drowning in debt. Her younger sister needed a dowry. And Robert Calloway had made it clear that marrying Abigail came with certain financial arrangements that would benefit everyone. So here she stood, in a dress that didn't fit, about to promise her life to a man she barely knew. The church was packed. Everyone in town had come, which should have felt like a celebration, but instead felt like an audience gathering for something they couldn't look away from. Abigail could hear the whispers even through the veil. She'd always been able to hear the whispers. Surprised he's going through with it. Well, her father's land borders his main route to the railhead. Still, you'd think a man like Calloway could do better. Abigail's hands were shaking. She gripped the wilted bouquet harder, felt a thorn dig into her palm through the silk wrapping. The small pain helped. It gave her something to focus on besides the growing certainty that something was wrong. Robert was still laughing. He hadn't looked at her once since she'd walked down the aisle. The Reverend cleared his throat. "Mr. Calloway, if you're ready." Robert turned then, finally, and walked toward the altar. But he didn't walk all the way to Abigail. He stopped about 3 feet short, still smiling that easy smile, and looked out at the congregation instead of at his bride. "You know," Robert said, his voice carrying across the church with the practiced projection of a man used to making speeches, "I've been thinking about this moment for weeks." Abigail's stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the ceremony. The Reverend looked confused. Someone in the back pews coughed. "I've been thinking," Robert continued, "about what it means to take a wife, about the responsibilities, the expectations." He finally looked at Abigail then, and his smile changed into something else, something colder. "And I've come to realize," he said slowly, "that a man in my position needs to be more careful about the choices he makes, about the image he presents, about the kind of woman who stands beside him." The church had gone completely silent. Abigail couldn't move. She stood there in her too tight dress, holding her dying flowers, and watched Robert Calloway's face as he destroyed her in front of everyone she'd ever known. "The truth is," Robert said, and now he was playing to the crowd, feeding off their shocked attention, "I don't think Miss Harper and I are suited for marriage after all. I mean, look at her." He gestured at Abigail like she was livestock being appraised. A man needs a wife he can be proud of, someone who reflects well on his business, his standing in the community. Someone who doesn't— He paused, let the moment hang. Take up quite so much space. Someone in the congregation gasped. Someone else laughed, a quick, nervous sound that got strangled almost immediately. Abigail felt the veil against her face, felt the weight of every eye in the church. felt the exact moment her humiliation became complete. But underneath the shame, underneath the shock, something else was rising. Something that felt like anger, but sharper, cleaner. "I'm sorry," Robert said, and he didn't sound sorry at all. "I simply can't go through with this. I'm sure you understand." The Reverend looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Abigail's father stood up from the front pew, his face red, his mouth opening to say something. "Don't!" Abigail's voice cut through the church. It didn't sound like her voice. It was too steady, too clear. Everyone stared at her. She reached up and pulled the veil off. Not gently, not carefully, just ripped it away from the pins in her hair and let it fall to the floor. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was interesting. She felt very calm suddenly, in the way that people probably feel calm right before they do something irreversible. "You're right," Abigail said, looking directly at Robert Calloway. "We're not suited for marriage." Robert blinked, clearly not expecting her to speak. "Well, I'm glad because I would never marry a man who needs to humiliate a woman in public to feel powerful." The church went even quieter, which Abigail wouldn't have thought possible. Robert's smile vanished. "Now, Abigail—" "Miss Harper," she corrected, "and you're also right that I take up space. I take up exactly the amount of space that I occupy, which is apparently too much for you to tolerate in a wife. So let me make this easier for everyone." She dropped the bouquet. It hit the floor with a sad, soft sound. "I release you from this arrangement, Mr. Calloway. You're free to find someone smaller, someone more appropriate for a man of your standing, someone who can fit into whatever box you've decided a wife should occupy." Abigail turned to face the congregation. Her mother was crying. Her father looked stricken. Her younger sister, Sarah, sat frozen in the second pew, her eyes huge. "And to everyone here who came to watch," Abigail continued, her voice getting stronger, "thank you for bearing witness. I hope this was entertaining. I hope you got what you came for." She started walking down the aisle, not running, just walking with her head up and her shoulders back in that too-tight dress that she would burn the first chance she got. People scrambled out of her way. No one tried to stop her. Behind her, she heard Robert say something to the Reverend, heard her father's voice raised in anger or protest, heard the explosion of whispered conversation as the entire church erupted into chaos. But Abigail kept walking. She walked out the doors and into the brutal Kansas sunshine, into air so hot it felt solid, and she kept walking. She walked past the general store, past the land office, past the saloon where men stood in the doorway watching her with expressions she couldn't read and didn't care to interpret. She walked until the buildings thinned out and the prairie opened up in front of her, endless and brutal and indifferent. Only then did she stop. Only then did she let herself feel it, the full weight of what had just happened, what she'd lost, what she'd chosen to walk away from. The financial arrangements that would have saved her father's farm were gone. The security she'd been promised was gone. Whatever small hope she'd had for a future that didn't involve being a burden to her family was gone. She was 27 years old, publicly humiliated, wearing a wedding dress in the middle of nowhere, and she had absolutely no idea what to do next. The sun beat down. Sweat ran down her back under the ridiculous dress. In the distance, she could hear thunder. Not a real storm, just heat lightning playing across the horizon, promising rain that wouldn't come. Abigail stood there for a long time, just breathing. Then she started walking again. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have supplies. She didn't even have water. But she couldn't go back to town, couldn't face the looks and the whispers and her mother's devastated crying. And she couldn't go home to the farm, couldn't watch her father lose everything because his daughter was too proud and too large to accept humiliation gracefully. So she walked into the prairie, following a dry creek bed that wound north through the scrubland, and told herself she'd figure something out eventually. The dress made it difficult. It hadn't been designed for walking. It had been designed for standing still and looking appropriate for approximately 3 hours while legal documents were signed. The hem dragged in the dirt. The bodice made breathing an active challenge. The shoes were decorative torture devices that started rubbing blisters within the first mile. Abigail kept going anyway. The sun climbed higher. The heat became aggressive, physically oppressive, in a way that made thinking difficult. Abigail's throat went dry. Her lips cracked. She knew she should stop, should find shade, should do something other than continue walking aimlessly into the wilderness in a wedding dress. But stopping meant facing reality, and she wasn't ready for that yet. So she walked until the sun started its long slide toward evening, until her vision began to blur at the edges and her legs felt disconnected from her body. The creek bed got deeper, the bank steeper. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. The fall happened almost in slow motion. One moment she was walking, the next moment her foot came down on loose shale, and she was sliding, tumbling down the steep creek bank in a tangle of white fabric and dust. She hit the bottom hard, felt something in her ankle twist with a bright spike of pain, felt the air get knocked out of her lungs. For several long seconds, she just lay there in the dirt at the bottom of the dry creek, staring up at the sky and trying to remember how breathing worked. Pain radiated from her ankle. Her palms were scraped raw from trying to catch herself. The dress was ruined, torn, filthy, beyond any hope of repair, which was fine. She'd wanted to burn it anyway. Abigail tried to sit up, the world tilted sideways. She tried again, managed it this time, and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her ankle with enough force to make her gasp. Not good. She looked around. The creek bed was about 8 feet deep here, the bank steep and unstable. Above, the prairie stretched in every direction, empty and indifferent. No roads, no buildings, no people. She was alone. And she was hurt. And the sun was going down. Abigail felt the fear then, finally. Real fear. Not the social anxiety of humiliation, but the primal terror of being small and broken and alone in a place that didn't care whether she lived or died. "Okay," she said out loud, just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. "Okay. Think." But thinking was difficult. Her head felt strange, light, and heavy at the same time. She'd been walking in the heat for hours without water. She was probably in the early stages of heat exhaustion. The ankle was definitely sprained, possibly broken. The banks of the creek bed were too steep to climb even if her ankle had been fine. She was trapped. "Okay," she said again, quieter this time. The sky was starting to turn pink at the edges. Evening was coming, which meant cooler temperatures, which was good. But it also meant darkness, which was very much not good. The prairie at night was a different kind of dangerous. Coyotes, rattlesnakes, things that hunted in the dark. Abigail pulled herself backward until her back was against the creek bank, trying to get into some kind of defensible position, even though she had nothing to defend herself with. Her hands were shaking again. The calm clarity that had carried her through the church confrontation was completely gone, replaced by the cold understanding that she had made a series of very stupid decisions that were probably going to kill her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Her father, maybe. Sarah. Herself. The sun dropped lower. The shadows in the creek bed got deeper. Abigail's throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, just to rest. The sound of hoofbeats jerked her back to consciousness. For a confused second, she thought she'd imagined it. But no, there it was again. A horse, moving at a walk, somewhere above the creek bed. Hope and fear collided in her chest. Someone was there. Someone might help. Or someone might be exactly the kind of person a woman alone and injured should be terrified of encountering. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as a croak. She swallowed, winced at the pain, tried again. "Help!" It wasn't loud, but it was something. "Please, I'm down here." The hoofbeats stopped. Silence. Long enough that Abigail thought maybe she really had imagined it. Maybe the heat and dehydration were making her hallucinate. Then a man's voice, rough and cautious. "Where?" "In the creek bed." Abigail's voice was getting stronger. "I fell. I can't get out." More silence, then the sound of boots hitting ground, someone dismounting, footsteps approaching the edge of the creek bank. A man appeared at the rim, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Abigail couldn't see his face clearly, just his outline, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat pulled low. He looked down at her for a long moment without saying anything. "You're wearing a wedding dress," he said finally. It wasn't a question, just an observation, delivered in a flat tone that suggested he'd seen stranger things but couldn't immediately remember when. "Yes." Abigail didn't have the energy to explain. "You hurt?" "My ankle, and I need water." The man disappeared from the edge. Abigail heard him moving around up there, heard the creak of leather and the soft sound of a canteen being opened. Then he reappeared and carefully climbed down the bank, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from a lifetime of difficult terrain. Up close, she could see him better in the fading light, maybe mid-30s, weathered in the way that outdoor work makes people weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that watched her with careful assessment. He didn't look friendly exactly, but he didn't look cruel either. He looked tired. He held out the canteen, slow, not too much at once. Abigail took it with shaking hands and forced herself to sip instead of gulping, even though every cell in her body was screaming for her to drain the entire thing. The water was warm and tasted like metal, and was the best thing she'd ever experienced. "Thank you." Her voice sounded more human now. The man nodded. He crouched down next to her, not touching, and looked at her ankle. "Can you move it?" Abigail tried. Pain shot up her leg. "Not really. Probably sprained. Could be broken." He sat back on his heels, studying her face. "You got people looking for you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Did she? Her father probably, though whether he'd be looking to help her or just to deal with the scandal she'd created was unclear. Her mother would be too shocked to function. Sarah might look, but Sarah was 16 and wouldn't know where to start. "I don't know," Abigail said honestly. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The look of someone who knew what it was like to not have people. "All right," he said. "My ranch is about 5 miles north. I can get you there, get that ankle wrapped, get some food in you. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." It was the kind of offer that women were supposed to be suspicious of. Strange man, isolated ranch, no witnesses. Abigail knew all the warnings. She'd heard all the stories. But she was trapped in a creek bed with a possibly broken ankle, no water, and night coming fast. And this man, whoever he was, had given her water before asking for anything, had climbed down to check on her instead of just riding away. Sometimes you had to choose between different kinds of danger. "Okay," Abigail said. The man nodded. He stood, then bent and carefully lifted her, one arm under her knees and one behind her back, moving her like she weighed nothing at all. Abigail stiffened instinctively, waiting for the grunt of effort, the comment about her weight, the struggle. It didn't come. He just carried her to his horse, a big roan gelding that watched the proceedings with bored patience, and settled her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Name's Caleb Boone," he said, gathering the reins. "Hang on." They rode north through the gathering darkness, and Abigail Harper, still wearing her ruined wedding dress, still not sure if she'd made the right choice, but certain she'd made the only choice available, held on and tried not to think about what would come next. The ranch appeared as a collection of dark shapes against the horizon, lit by a single lamp in what was probably the main house. As they got closer, Abigail could make out more details. A barn that leaned slightly to one side, a corral with a few horses, several smaller outbuildings in various states of disrepair. It wasn't much. It looked like a place that was barely holding on. Caleb brought the horse to a stop near the house and dismounted, then carefully helped Abigail down. Her ankle screamed when she tried to put weight on it. "Easy," Caleb steadied her. "Don't try to walk." He lifted her again and carried her up the steps to the porch, through a door that needed new hinges, into a front room that was sparse but clean. A table, a few chairs, a cold fireplace. He set her down in one of the chairs and immediately moved to light a lamp. In the lamplight, Abigail could see the room better. It was a bachelor's space, functional, organized, but with the kind of emptiness that suggested no woman had lived here in a very long time, if ever. No curtains on the windows, no decorations, just the basics. "I'll get some bandages for that ankle," Caleb said, "and some food. You should eat." "I don't want to be a burden," Abigail said automatically, then immediately felt stupid. She was sitting in his house with a possibly broken ankle, wearing a destroyed wedding dress. She was objectively already a burden. Caleb paused in the doorway and looked back at her. "You're not a burden. You're hurt. There's a difference." He disappeared into what was probably a bedroom. Abigail sat in the chair and looked around the room, trying to reconcile her exhaustion with the strange, surreal feeling of being here, in this place, with this man she didn't know. Through the window, she could hear men's voices outside. Ranch hands, probably, finishing evening work. One of them laughed at something. The sound was jarring, normal human interaction happening while Abigail's entire life had just collapsed. Caleb came back with bandages and a basin of water. He set them on the table and knelt in front of her, reaching carefully for her injured ankle. "This is going to hurt," he warned. He was right. As he eased off the ruined shoe and examined the ankle, pain spiked sharp enough to make Abigail's vision go white at the edges. She gripped the chair arms and tried not to make noise. "Definitely sprained," Caleb said. "Maybe a small fracture. Hard to tell without—" He stopped, seemed to decide that more medical details weren't helpful. "I'll wrap it. Keep weight off it for a few weeks." His hands were careful as he cleaned the scrapes on her palms and bandaged her ankle, wrapping it firm but not tight. He worked with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested he'd dealt with injuries before. "Thank you," Abigail said when he finished. Caleb stood and moved to the small kitchen area, started putting together food, bread, some kind of dried meat, an apple that had seen better days. He brought it to the table without ceremony. "Eat." Abigail ate. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. The bread was slightly stale, but she didn't care. The meat was tough, but she didn't care about that either. Caleb watched her for a moment, then seemed satisfied and moved to pour water into 2 tin cups. He set one in front of her and took the other to the window, where he stood looking out at the darkened ranch. "So," he said after a long silence, "you gonna tell me why you were walking across the prairie in a wedding dress? Or should I just assume it's none of my business?" Abigail swallowed a bite of bread. The question was fair. She owed him at least some explanation. "I was supposed to get married today," she said. "It didn't work out." "I can see that. The man I was supposed to marry decided, in front of the entire church, that I wasn't suitable after all. Too large. Too much space." She said it flatly, just stating facts, but something about saying it out loud made it real in a new way. Made it hurt again. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, "He sounds like an idiot." It was said matter-of-factly, no particular emotion behind it, which somehow made it hit harder than sympathy would have. Abigail felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she hadn't known was there. "Yes," she agreed. "He was. So you walked into the prairie." "I couldn't go home, couldn't face—" She stopped, shook her head. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Obviously." "Obviously." Caleb took a drink from his cup. "What's your name?" "Abigail Harper." "Abby." "Well, Abby Harper. You're welcome to stay here until that ankle heals enough for you to walk. After that, we'll figure out what comes next." It was a practical offer, delivered in that same flat tone that seemed to be Caleb's default. No pity, no judgment, just logistics. "I can work," Abigail said quickly. "I mean, once I can walk, I can earn my keep. I'm good with numbers, with organizing. I can cook, clean, whatever you need. Let's just get through tonight first." Caleb turned from the window and looked at her directly for the first time since they'd arrived. His eyes were dark, hard to read in the lamplight, but not unkind. "You've had a rough day," he said. "Rest. Everything else can wait." Abigail wanted to argue, wanted to establish her usefulness immediately, wanted to prove she wasn't just another problem to be dealt with. But the exhaustion was catching up with her now, hitting all at once, and arguing required energy she no longer had. "Okay," she said quietly. Caleb showed her to a small room, barely more than a closet with a narrow bed, and left her there with a blanket and another lamp. Abigail sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at her ruined wedding dress. She should take it off, should try to find something else to wear, should do something other than sit here in the wreckage of the worst day of her life. But instead she lay down, still wearing the dress, and stared at the ceiling. Outside she could hear the ranch settling into night, horses moving in the corral, the creak of the barn. Somewhere far off, a coyote called into the darkness. Abigail closed her eyes and tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Tried not to think about her father's debt, her family's reputation, the fact that she had absolutely no plan and no future and no idea how to fix any of it. Tried not to think about Robert Calloway's face as he humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. Tried not to think about the fact that somewhere inside her, underneath the fear and the shame and the exhaustion, there was a small, fierce part that was glad. Glad she'd walked away. Glad she'd refused to shrink herself to fit into his idea of acceptable. That part scared her more than anything else, because that part suggested this wasn't over. That walking away from the church had been the beginning of something, not the end. That maybe, despite everything, she was going to survive this. And Abigail Harper wasn't sure she was ready to find out what survival would require from her. Morning came with the sound of men arguing. Abigail woke disoriented, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache, her mouth tasting like dust and regret. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was wrong. The light was wrong. Everything was wrong. Then memory crashed back. The church. Robert. The prairie. Caleb Boone. She was still wearing the wedding dress. It had seemed like such an urgent problem last night, but exhaustion had won. Now the fabric was stiff with dried sweat and dirt, twisted around her legs, suffocating. The voices outside got louder. "Don't care what you found. You can't just bring strays back here. We're barely feeding ourselves." She was hurt. That was Caleb's voice, flat and unmoved. "So? That's her problem, not ours." Abigail sat up carefully, testing her ankle. It was swollen, purple, and hurt like hell. She wasn't walking anywhere today. Through the thin walls, she could hear boots on the porch, the creak of wood. "You know what kind of trouble women bring?" the other man continued. "Especially women running from something, and she's clearly running." "Tom," Caleb's voice carried a warning. "I'm serious. We got enough problems without adding whatever mess she's dragging behind her." Abigail pulled herself to her feet, using the wall for balance. Her ankle screamed, but she ignored it. She wasn't going to lie in bed while men decided her fate like she was livestock being appraised. She'd had enough of that yesterday. The door to her room stuck. She had to yank it open, which killed whatever dramatic entrance she might have made. She hobbled into the main room just as Caleb and another man turned to look at her. The other man was older, maybe 50, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that assessed her with open suspicion. His hand rested on his belt near a knife sheath, not threatening exactly, but aware. "Miss Harper," Caleb said, "this is Tom Brennan, my foreman." "The stray," Abigail said flatly. Tom had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And you're right. I am running from something. From a man who humiliated me in front of an entire town. From a family drowning in debt I can't fix. From a future that was always going to be too small for me no matter how hard I tried to fit." She leaned against the doorframe, taking weight off her ankle. "So yes, I'm trouble. But I'm also not stupid, and I'm not helpless, and I'm not going to lie in that room while you decide whether I'm worth the cost of feeding." The silence that followed was thick. Tom looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Abigail with that same unreadable expression he'd worn last night. "You done?" Caleb asked. "Probably not, but that'll do for now." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Caleb's face, gone so fast Abigail wasn't sure she'd seen it. "Tom, give us a minute?" Tom looked like he wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He nodded once and headed out, letting the door slam behind him. Caleb moved to the stove and poured coffee from a battered pot into 2 cups. He brought one to Abigail. "You should sit before you fall down." She wanted to refuse on principle, but her ankle was already shaking from the effort of standing. She took the chair nearest the window and accepted the coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint and tasted like it had been sitting on that stove since yesterday. It was perfect. "Tom's not wrong," Caleb said, leaning against the counter. "We are barely feeding ourselves. This ranch is dying by inches, cattle sick, wells running dry, debt that keeps growing no matter how hard we work." "Then why did you bring me here?" "Because you were hurt and alone, and the alternative was leaving you to die in a creek bed." He said it like it was obvious. But that doesn't change the fact that we're one bad season away from losing everything. Abigail drank her coffee and looked around the room in the morning light. Yesterday's exhaustion had made everything blur together, but now she could see the details. The repair work that had been started and abandoned. The thin layer of dust on surfaces that suggested cleaning was a luxury no one had time for. The books on the shelf, accounting ledgers mostly, shoved in with what looked like ranch records. "Let me see your books," she said. Caleb blinked. "What?" "Your financial records. Let me look at them." "Why?" "Because I'm good with numbers. Because my father's farm was in debt, and I managed to keep it running for 3 years longer than it should have lasted. Because if I'm going to be trouble, I might as well be useful trouble." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to the shelf and pulled down several ledgers, dropping them on the table with a thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. "Knock yourself out," he said. "But don't expect miracles. Tom keeps the books and he's thorough. If there was money hiding somewhere, he'd have found it." Abigail opened the first ledger. The handwriting was neat, the columns properly organized. Tom might be suspicious of strays, but he knew how to keep records. She started reading, flipping pages, tracking numbers. Caleb watched her for a few minutes, then seemed to decide she wasn't going to immediately collapse. "I've got work. There's bread in the box if you're hungry. Don't try to walk on that ankle." He left her there with the books and the stale coffee. Abigail read for 2 hours straight, tracking income and expenses, noting patterns, making mental calculations. The ranch's problems weren't subtle. Cattle sales were down. Feed costs were up. Vet bills were mounting. Water development was eating through cash reserves that had already been thin. But there was something else, something that didn't quite add up. She was 3 ledgers deep when Tom came back, this time without the hostility, but with the same careful suspicion. He stood in the doorway watching her work. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. "Maybe. These cattle sales from last year." She turned a ledger around so he could see. "You sold 200 head through the Cowboy Processing Company in September. Price per head was $12. "That's right. But the market rate in September was closer to 18. I remember because my father sold 30 head that same month and got $17.50. Tom's face went carefully neutral. "Market fluctuates." "Not that much. Not for the same grade of cattle going to the same buyers." "You saying I'm lying?" "I'm saying someone is. Either you're lying about the numbers, or Callaway Processing Company is lying about the price they paid you." Abigail met his eyes. "And given that Robert Callaway is the man I was supposed to marry yesterday, I'm betting it's not you who's lying." Tom sat down slowly in the chair across from her. "Callaway. You know him?" "Everyone knows him. He controls half the processing contracts in 3 counties. You cross him, you don't get your cattle to market." Tom rubbed his face. "You're saying he's been shorting us?" "I'm saying these numbers don't match market rates. And if he's doing it to you, he's probably doing it to every small ranch that doesn't have the power to push back." Tom pulled another ledger toward him, started cross-referencing. His face got harder with every page. "How long?" Abigail had already done that math. "At least 3 years, maybe longer. These are the only records here." 3 years. Tom said it quietly, but there was rage underneath. 3 years of him stealing from us while we couldn't figure out why we were drowning. "Do you have copies of the actual sale receipts, the papers Callaway's company gave you when they took the cattle?" "Should be in the office in the barn." "Get them." Tom looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked out without another word. Abigail went back to the ledgers, but her hands were shaking now. Robert Callaway hadn't just humiliated her. He'd been systematically stealing from the ranches that depended on him for market access, probably including her own father's farm. And she'd almost married him, almost let him tire to his crimes without even knowing it. The anger felt clean, useful, better than shame. Tom came back 20 minutes later with a wooden box full of papers. He dumped them on the table and they started going through them together, matching receipts to ledger entries, building a picture of exactly how much had been stolen and how long it had been going on. By the time Caleb came back for lunch, they had 3 years of discrepancies documented and totaled. The number was staggering. "We're missing almost $4,000, Tom said without preamble. "That's what should have been coming to this ranch if we'd been paid fair market rates. 4,000. Caleb stood very still. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Tom gestured at the papers spread across the table. "She found it. I verified it. Callaway's been robbing us blind." Caleb looked at Abigail. "You did this." "I just read the numbers. They were all there. $4,000. Caleb said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of the words. "That's the difference between this ranch surviving and dying. That's money we can't get back," Tom said. "Unless you want to try taking Callaway to court, which—" He laughed, bitter. "Good luck with that. He owns half the lawyers in Abilene." Abigail was already thinking past that problem. "We don't need courts. We need leverage." Both men looked at her. "If he's doing this to you, he's doing it to others. Probably every small rancher in the county. If we can prove it, document it, we can force him to settle. Because the last thing Robert Callaway wants is public scandal." "You really think he'd settle?" Tom asked. Man like that? Abigail thought about Robert standing in that church, thought about the calculated cruelty of what he'd done, thought about how much he cared about his reputation and standing in the community. Yes, she said. I think he'd pay almost anything to keep this quiet. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down, looking at the numbers spread across his table. This is dangerous. Calloway's not the type to let something like this go. I know. You sure you want to get involved? You could walk away from this. None of it's your problem. Abigail looked down at her bandaged ankle, thought about the wedding dress she'd finally managed to peel off this morning and leave in a ruined heap on the floor, thought about Robert's face as he destroyed her in front of everyone. Actually, she said, I think it's exactly my problem. Over the next 3 days, while her ankle healed enough to let her hobble around with a stick Caleb carved for her, Abigail systematically reorganized the ranch's entire record-keeping system. She found more discrepancies, not just in cattle sales but in supply purchases, contract work, even water rights fees. The ranch had been hemorrhaging money for years, death by 1,000 small cuts that no one had time to trace back to their source. The ranch hands watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and grudging respect. There were 5 of them besides Tom, young men mostly, working for wages that barely covered food and a place to sleep. They called her the church lady at first, which Abigail hated but tolerated because it was better than some alternatives. The youngest one, a kid named Danny, who couldn't have been more than 17, was the first to actually talk to her like a person. Is it true you left a man at the altar? He asked one afternoon while she was working through feed invoices at the kitchen table. Other way around, he left me. That's stupid. Abigail looked up. Danny was standing in the doorway holding his hat, looking uncomfortable but determined to have this conversation. Stupid how? She asked. You found all that missing money. You're smart. He's stupid for not seeing that. It was possibly the nicest thing anyone had said to her in days. Thank you, Danny. He nodded, went red, and disappeared back outside. But after that, the other hand started talking to her too. Not much. Cowboy small talk about weather and sick cattle, and whether the North Well was going to hold through summer, but it was something. She was becoming a person to them instead of just a problem. Tom was harder to win over. He worked with her on the books because the numbers demanded it, but he kept his distance otherwise, until the day she found the discrepancy in the vet bills. These charges don't make sense, she said, catching him as he came in for dinner. Dr. Morrison charged you for treating 40 head of cattle for bloat last March, but your own notes say you only had 23 cases. Tom took the ledger, studied it. His jaw tightened. Morrison's been overcharging too. Either that or your notes are wrong. My notes aren't wrong. He looked at her. You think Morrison's in on it? With Calloway? I think Morrison knows which side his bread is buttered on. Calloway probably sends him a lot of business. Maybe Morrison kicks back a percentage. Maybe Calloway just expects favors. Either way, you're paying for treatment you didn't get. Tom sat down heavily. It's everywhere, isn't it? The whole system's rigged against us. Not the whole system, just the parts controlled by men who have more power than conscience. Abigail closed the ledger. But that also means if we can document it, we can break it. You really believe that? I have to. The alternative is accepting that people like Robert Calloway just win, and I'm not ready to accept that. Tom looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, sharp. All right, what do you need? I need to talk to other ranchers, find out if they're seeing the same patterns. Build a case big enough that Calloway can't make it disappear. That's going to mean leaving the ranch. Your ankle ready for that? Abigail tested it. Still hurt, still swollen, but she could put weight on it now without wanting to scream. It'll have to be. Caleb was less enthusiastic about the plan. You want to ride around the county asking ranchers to admit they've been cheated? He said that night after the hands had gone to their bunkhouse. You know how that sounds? Like I'm trying to help them. Like you're trying to make trouble. These are proud men running failing ranches. You think they're going to admit to some woman they've never met that they've been too stupid to notice they're being robbed? Abigail set down her coffee cup carefully. Then maybe you should come with me. Vouch for me. Make it a conversation between ranchers instead of some stranger asking uncomfortable questions. I've got a ranch to run. A ranch that's drowning because of Calloway's theft. How much more can you afford to lose before there's nothing left to run? That hit home. Caleb's expression didn't change, but she saw him flinch. You don't pull punches. I don't have time to. Neither do you. They left 2 days later, taking Caleb's wagon because Abigail still couldn't ride for long periods. Tom stayed behind to manage the ranch, though he looked like he wanted to argue about it. They headed south first, to the smaller spreads that dotted the land between Caleb's ranch and Abilene. The first ranch they visited belonged to a man named Henry Watts, who took one look at Abigail and tried to close the door in their faces. I don't need whatever you're selling, he said. We're not selling anything, Caleb said. We need to talk about Callaway processing. That got Henry's attention. He looked at Caleb, then at Abigail, then back at Caleb. Who's she? Someone who knows how to read financial records. Let us in, Henry. They sat at Henry's kitchen table, which was somehow messier than Caleb's, despite Henry having a wife who watched Abigail with open hostility and went through the same process. Abigail asked for his sales records. Henry resisted. Caleb pushed. Eventually, Henry produced 3 years of receipts, and Abigail found the same pattern. Market rates that didn't match reality. Consistent shortfalls that added up to serious money. $1,500, she said finally. That's what you're missing over 3 years. Henry's wife made a small sound. Henry himself just stared at the numbers. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. What am I supposed to do about it? Take Callaway to court? I can't afford a lawyer. You won't need one if we do this right, Abigail said. But I need you to document everything. Keep these records. When the time comes, you'll need to stand with the other ranchers and demand fair settlement. Other ranchers? You're not the only one he's stealing from. They visited 4 more ranches that day. The pattern held everywhere. Some ranchers were angry, some were defeated, some were both. But by the end of the day, Abigail had documented over $12,000 in stolen payments across 5 small ranches, and she hadn't even scratched the surface yet. On the ride back to Caleb's place, neither of them spoke for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Abigail had any energy left to appreciate it. You were right, Caleb said finally. About what? You're not helpless. Or stupid. He kept his eyes on the road. Tom was wrong to call you a stray. But right that I'm trouble. Yeah, but maybe the good kind. Abigail didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode in comfortable silence until the lights of the ranch appeared ahead. But as they got closer, Abigail noticed something wrong. Too many horses in the corral, too many lamps lit in the bunkhouse, and Tom standing on the porch with his rifle, waiting. Caleb saw it too. He slowed the wagon. What happened? We had visitors, Tom called out. Men from Callaway Processing said they were here to verify cattle counts for contract purposes. I told them to leave. They said they'd be back tomorrow with proper authorization. Abigail felt ice settle in her stomach. He knows. Knows what? Caleb asked. That we're digging into the records, someone told him. She looked at Caleb. Someone from one of the ranches we visited today. They warned him. Tom came down from the porch. They asked about you specifically, the woman staying here. Wanted to know why Caleb Boone's ranch was suddenly so interested in old contracts. We need to move faster, Abigail said. We need to get to the other ranchers before Callaway can pressure them into silence. Or we need to stop, Caleb said quietly, before this gets worse. Abigail turned to look at him. You want to quit? I want to keep my ranch, keep my men employed, keep us all alive. He met her eyes. Going after Callaway is dangerous. You saw how those ranchers reacted. Most of them are terrified of him, and now he knows what we're doing. So we should just let him keep stealing? Let him win? I'm saying we should be smart about this. Pick our battles. No. Abigail climbed down from the wagon, ignoring the protest from her ankle. You don't pick battles with men like Robert Callaway. You fight them until they're done, or they destroy you slowly. I've spent my whole life trying to be small enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough. Where did it get me? Standing in a church while a man publicly destroyed me for not fitting his standards. She was aware she was almost shouting now, aware that Tom and Caleb were both staring at her, aware that ranch hands were probably watching from the bunkhouse. She didn't care. I'm done shrinking, she said. I'm done pretending that playing by their rules will somehow protect me. So you can quit if you want. You can tell me to leave, but I'm not stopping. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Caleb said very quietly, I'm not asking you to leave. Then what are you asking? I'm asking if you're ready for what comes next. Because Calloway's not going to back down. This is going to get ugly. Abigail thought about the church, about Robert's face, about every moment in her life when she'd been told she was too much, too big, too loud, too difficult. Good, she said. I'm done with pretty. They came at dawn, just like Tom had predicted. Abigail was already awake, had been awake most of the night going through the documented evidence they'd collected, organizing it into something that could stand up to scrutiny. Her ankle throbbed dully, but she'd stopped paying attention to it. Pain was just information now, telling her body was still working, still fighting. Through the window she saw them, 6 riders coming up the road in a tight formation that wasn't casual. These weren't ranch hands out for morning work. These were men with purpose. "Caleb!" she called out, not loud but urgent. He appeared from his room, already dressed, already awake. Maybe he hadn't slept either. How many? 6. Could be Calloway's men, could be Law. Law wouldn't come at dawn. Caleb moved to the window, studied the approaching riders. His face went hard. That's Sheriff Porter in front. Calloway must have filed some kind of complaint. Tom came through the door without knocking, rifle in hand. They're here for her, aren't they? Probably. Caleb didn't take his eyes off the riders. Abby, get in the back room. No. This isn't negotiable. You're right, it's not. Abigail stood her ground. If they're here for me, hiding won't help. It'll just make me look guilty of whatever Roberts accused me of. The riders pulled up in front of the house. Sheriff Porter dismounted slowly, deliberately. He was an older man, heavy around the middle, with the kind of face that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him, 5 men stayed mounted. Abigail recognized 2 of them. They'd been at the wedding, guests of Roberts. Caleb stepped out onto the porch. Abigail followed before he could stop her. "Sheriff?" Caleb said neutrally. "Boone." Porter's eyes moved to Abigail. "Miss Harper." "What can we do for you?" Caleb asked. Porter pulled a folded paper from his vest. "I've got a complaint here from Robert Calloway. Says Miss Harper is in possession of documents belonging to Calloway Processing Company. Says she stole them from his offices in town." "That's a lie," Abigail said. "I've never been to his offices." "Says here you had access to confidential business records and removed them without authorization. That's theft, Miss Harper." "The records I have came from this ranch and 4 others. They're sales receipts and ledgers that belong to the ranchers, not to Calloway." Porter looked uncomfortable. "That's not what Mr. Calloway says." "Then Mr. Calloway is lying." Abigail came down the porch steps, ignoring the warning look from Caleb. "And we both know why. Those records prove he's been systematically defrauding every small rancher in this county. He's not trying to recover stolen property. He's trying to cover up his crimes." One of the mounted men spoke up. "You hear that, Sheriff? She's admitting she's got Mr. Calloway's documents." "I'm admitting I have evidence of fraud," Abigail corrected. "There's a difference." Porter sighed like a man who'd been expecting this to be simple and was discovering it very much wasn't. "Miss Harper, I'm going to need you to come into town with me. We can sort this out proper at the office." "No." Caleb's voice was flat. "Now, Boone, she's not going anywhere until we see proper documentation. Show me the warrant." Porter hesitated. "I don't have a warrant. This is just a complaint." "Then she's not going anywhere." Caleb crossed his arms. "You want to arrest her, Sheriff? You come back with a warrant, and we'll talk. Until then, you're on my property, and this conversation is over." The tension ratcheted up immediately. The mounted men's hands moved toward weapons. Tom appeared in the doorway behind them with his rifle visible. The ranch hands were emerging from the bunkhouse, not armed, but present. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Porter said. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, Calloway's trying to use your badge to intimidate a witness before she can expose his crimes. How's that going to look when this all comes out?" Porter's face went red. "You calling me corrupt?" "I'm saying you're being used, and if you're smart, you'll stop and think about what side of this you want to be on when the truth comes out." For a long moment, nobody moved. Abigail could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. One of the mounted men's horses shifted, nervous. Then Porter folded the paper back up and shoved it in his vest. "I'll be back with a warrant." "You do that," Caleb said. The sheriff remounted, and the 6 riders turned and headed back down the road at a trot that was just short of running. Abigail watched until they were out of sight, then realized her hands were shaking. "That bought us maybe a day," Tom said from the doorway. "2 if we're lucky." "Then we use it." Abigail turned back to the house. "We need to get this evidence to someone who can actually do something with it. Someone Calloway can't intimidate or buy off." "Who?" Caleb asked. "Porter's the law in Abilene. The judge is in Calloway's pocket. Even if we go to the federal marshal, that takes time we don't have." Abigail was already thinking, running through options. "What about the newspapers? The Abilene Chronicle?" Tom snorted. "Run by Marcus Webb. Webb and Calloway are drinking buddies." "Not Abilene, then. Somewhere bigger. Topeka. The state capital has newspapers that aren't controlled by local interests." "That's 3 days' ride," Caleb said. "You think Calloway is going to wait 3 days?" "No. But he's also not going to want this spreading beyond his control. If we can get the story to Topeka, make it public before he can spin it, he'll have to respond honestly instead of just crushing us quietly." Danny came jogging over from the bunkhouse. "Boss, we got another problem. The north pasture. There's smoke." Everyone turned. Sure enough, a thin column of smoke was rising from the direction of the northern grazing land. "Could be lightning," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. "In this heat with no rain for 3 weeks?" Caleb was already moving. "That's not lightning." They took horses, riding hard across the dry grassland toward the smoke. By the time they got close, Abigail could see the flames, not huge yet, but growing, feeding on the drought-dead vegetation. And next to the fire, 3 men on horseback were riding away fast. "Son of a—" Caleb didn't finish. He was already shouting orders. "Danny, ride back and get everyone. Every hand, every bucket, every tool we've got. Tom, start a fire break on the south side. Abby, I can help. Your ankle is fine enough. Tell me what to do." There wasn't time to argue. The fire was spreading fast, driven by wind that seemed to come from nowhere the way prairie wind did. Caleb put her on bucket duty, hauling water from the creek to dump on the advancing edge of the flames, while the men worked to cut a fire break, a strip of bare dirt that might stop the fire's advance if they could make it wide enough, fast enough. Abigail had never worked so hard in her life. Her ankles screamed. Her arms felt like they were going to tear off. The smoke was thick enough to choke on, and the heat was like standing too close to an oven that was trying to kill you. But she kept moving because everyone else kept moving, because stopping meant losing the ranch, because those men on horseback had done this deliberately, and she'd be damned before she let them win. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and sweat, and the awful crackling sound of fire consuming everything it touched. More hands arrived from neighboring spreads. Word had spread somehow, the way word always did in the country. Ranchers who barely spoke to each other normally worked side by side against the common enemy of fire. By early afternoon, they had the main blaze contained, though hot spots kept flaring up. Abigail was sitting in the dirt trying to remember how breathing worked when Caleb came over and just collapsed next to her. "You all right?" he asked. She laughed, which turned into coughing. "I'm covered in soot. Pretty sure I've got burns I haven't noticed yet, and I can't feel my arms. So basically perfect." He almost smiled. "Almost. Thank you for helping. It's my fault. Calloway did this because of me. Calloway did this because he's a criminal trying to cover his crimes. That's on him, not you." Tom approached, limping slightly. "Lost about 40 acres of grazing land. Could have been worse. Would have been worse if we hadn't caught it when we did." He looked at Abigail. "You sure about going to Topeka? Because this is just the beginning. He's going to keep escalating." "I know. Could get people killed." "I know that too." Tom studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. Then we better make damn sure the story gets told right." They spent the evening documenting the fire, taking statements from the hands who'd seen the riders, identifying them from memory. 2 of them had been among Calloway's men that morning, building a case for arson on top of the fraud charges. Abigail was organizing the papers when a thought struck her. "The documents, where are they?" Caleb looked up from where he was bandaging a burn on his arm. "The ledgers and receipts?" "In the house." "Why?" "Because if Calloway's willing to burn the grazing land, he'll burn the house too. We need copies, multiple copies, stored in different locations." "That'll take days." "Yeah, we have tonight. Maybe tomorrow. We do it now or we risk losing everything." They worked through the night again. This time with Danny and two other hands helping, copying records by lamplight, creating duplicate sets of the most damning evidence. Abigail's hand cramped from writing, but she kept going. They stored one set at a neighboring ranch, buried another set in a waterproof box near the creek, kept the originals in the house, but ready to move at a moment's notice. Dawn came with no sleep and no rest. Abigail was fairly certain she looked like hell, soot-stained, exhausted, wearing borrowed men's clothing because her other dress had been destroyed in the firefight. She didn't care. Sheriff Porter came back at mid-morning, this time with 8 men and a piece of paper he waved like it meant something. "Got your warrant, Boone," he called from the road. "Miss Harper, you're under arrest for theft and conspiracy to defraud." Conspiracy to defraud? Abigail stepped out onto the porch. That's rich coming from Calloway. You can argue with the judge. Right now you're coming with me. Caleb was beside her immediately. What's the bond? $500. Caleb went very still. $500 might as well have been $5,000 for a ranch that had been bled dry for years. Porter knew it. Everyone knew it. I'll pay it, Tom said from behind them. Everyone turned to look at him. I've got money saved, Tom continued. Was going to buy my own place someday, but... He shrugged. This is more important. Tom, you can't... Caleb started. Already decided. Tom looked at Abigail. You found the proof that we've been robbed for years. You nearly broke yourself fighting that fire. You could have run a dozen times by now, but you stayed. So yeah, I'll post bond. And when this is over and we've taken Calloway down, you can pay me back by helping me find some land worth buying. Abigail felt something crack in her chest, some defensive wall she'd been keeping up without realizing it. Thank you. The ride into town was tense. Porter had his men surrounding the wagon like Abigail was dangerous, which was almost funny. She was one woman with a sprained ankle and evidence of fraud. But she supposed to men like Calloway, that made her the most dangerous thing in the county. Abilene looked different in daylight, harsher. People stopped and stared as the wagon passed. Some whispered. Some just watched with flat expressions. Abigail kept her head up and her eyes forward. The sheriff's office was a small building that smelled like old coffee and resignation. Porter processed the arrest with the air of a man doing something he found distasteful but necessary. The judge, a thin man with watery eyes named Harrison, set the arraignment for 3 days out. 3 days, Abigail said. That's what the docket allows, Harrison said. He didn't look at her when he spoke. Sheriff, release her on bond once it's posted. Tom came through within the hour with the money. Porter accepted it, filled out the paperwork, and let Abigail go with a warning to not leave the county. Wasn't planning to, Abigail said. Though actually she was planning exactly that. A ride to Topeka to deliver evidence to people who might actually do something with it. But Porter didn't need to know that yet. They made it back to the ranch by evening. Caleb was waiting on the porch, and the relief on his face when he saw them was brief, but real. We've got 3 days, Abigail said. How fast can you ride to Topeka? 2 days if I push it, but I'm not leaving you here alone. I won't be alone. Tom and the hands will be here. That's not what I meant. Abigail looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since all this started, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the worry he was trying to hide, the way he stood like he was ready to fight anyone who came near her. Caleb, this has to get out. If we wait for the arraignment, Harrison will rule however Calloway tells him to rule. The evidence will disappear, this whole thing will get buried, and everyone will go back to being robbed blind. I know. So someone has to ride to Topeka, and it can't be me because I'm under bond and can't leave the county. It has to be you. He was quiet for a long time. Then, you're not going to let this go, are you? Would you? If you'd found proof that someone was stealing from you, destroying you slowly, would you just accept it? No, but I also wouldn't put myself in the line of fire for people who haven't exactly been kind to you. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it because it's right. And because the alternative is letting men like Robert Calloway win. She touched his arm. Please, trust me to handle things here. Get this evidence to Topeka. Make it public. That's the only way we stop him. Caleb looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, some decision being made. All right, he said, but you stay on this ranch. You don't go into town, you don't confront anyone, you don't do anything that gives Calloway an excuse to hurt you. Deal. He left before dawn the next morning, saddlebags loaded with copies of the evidence, and a letter Abigail had written to the editor of the Topeka Daily Eagle laying out the entire case. She watched him ride north until he disappeared, then turned back to the ranch and tried not to think about how exposed she suddenly felt. The day passed slowly. Abigail helped Tom with the books, checked on the recovery efforts in the burned pasture, tried to keep herself useful. But there was an edge to everything now, a waiting quality that made her skin crawl. The explosion came that night. Not a literal explosion, though there was fire involved. It started in the barn. One of the hands smelled smoke and raised the alarm around midnight. By the time they got organized, the whole structure was burning, flames climbing toward the hayloft where months of feed was stored. "Get the horses out," Tom was shouting, already running toward the corral. "Don't try to save the building, just get the animals clear." Abigail ran with the others, threw open stall doors, drove terrified horses out into the night. The heat was immense, the smoke blinding. She could hear beams starting to crack overhead, could feel the building dying around her. She was almost out when she heard it, the high scream of a horse still trapped somewhere inside. "Everyone out?" Tom yelled from the door. Danny did a quick count. "That's all of them!" But it wasn't. Abigail could still hear that scream, could pinpoint it coming from the back corner where the tack room was. One of the horses must have run the wrong way in panic, gotten itself trapped. She should leave it. The barn was coming down any second. It was just a horse. Abigail ran back inside. "What are you doing?" Tom's voice was distant, muffled by the roar of fire. She found the horse in the tack room, wild-eyed and screaming, caught behind a fallen beam that blocked the doorway. The beam was too heavy for her to lift, still burning on one end. But there was space underneath, maybe enough. "Come on," she said to the horse, trying to sound calm while her lungs filled with smoke. "You have to trust me." She grabbed the horse's halter, pulled. The animal fought her, too panicked to understand she was trying to help. Abigail pulled harder, felt her ankle give a warning spike of pain as she braced against the floor. "Now!" she shouted, and yanked with everything she had. The horse came through, stumbling, knocking Abigail backward into a wall hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. For a second she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch as a section of roof caved in exactly where she'd been standing 2 seconds earlier. The horse bolted for the door. Abigail scrambled after it, crawling when her legs wouldn't work, coughing so hard she thought she might break something. Hands grabbed her at the door, Tom and Danny pulling her clear just as the entire hayloft collapsed inward with a sound like the end of the world. They dragged her away from the burning building and laid her in the dirt. Abigail coughed until she thought she might turn inside out, tasted blood, couldn't get enough air. "You stupid," Tom was saying, but his voice cracked. "You almost... What were you thinking?" "Horse," Abigail managed between coughs. "Still inside. It's a horse. You're a person." "Still alive?" She tried to sit up, failed. "Barely." But Tom was checking her over, making sure nothing was broken. "You've got burns, and you probably breathed in enough smoke to kill a normal person. Good thing I'm not normal." She meant it as a joke, but it came out wrong, bitter. Tom looked at her strangely. "No," he said. "You're really not." They watched the barn burn. There was no saving it, no point in trying. All they could do was keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. By dawn, it was just smoking ruins and exhausted people covered in soot. Danny found the oil-soaked rags in what was left of the tack room. Clear evidence of arson. No accident this time, no plausible deniability. Someone had come onto the ranch and deliberately set the fire. "We need to report this to Porter," one of the hands said. "No point," Tom said tiredly. "We all know who's behind it, and we all know Porter won't do anything." Abigail was thinking past the fire, looking at the pattern. First the grassland, now the barn. Escalating attacks, each one more damaging than the last. Calloway was trying to break them, destroy their ability to function, make them desperate enough to back down. "He's going to come here," she said. "Himself, I mean. Not just his men." Tom looked at her. "Why would he do that?" "Because the attacks aren't working. We're still here, still fighting, so he'll come to make an offer, back off. And he'll make the charges go away, maybe even throw some money at us to ease the sting. Give us a way out that looks reasonable." "How do you know?" "Because that's what powerful men do. They destroy you first, make you desperate, then offer you mercy like it's generosity instead of extortion. She stood up slowly, testing her protesting body. And when he comes, we need to be ready. Robert Calloway arrived 2 days later, alone except for a lawyer carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most ranchers made in a year. He came mid-morning when everyone would be working, when the burned barn would be most visible as a reminder of what he could do. Abigail watched from the house window as he dismounted, straightening his expensive suit, looking around the ranch with an expression of mild distaste. She'd known he was coming, but seeing him still hit like a punch to the chest. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been destroying her in a church. Now he was here to finish the job. She stepped out onto the porch before Tom could try to handle this alone. Robert's eyebrows went up. Abigail, I'd heard you were here, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Seems a strange choice, running to the arms of another man so quickly after our misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. You humiliated me publicly because you're cruel. That's pretty clear. I freed you from a marriage that would have been a mistake for both of us. I thought you'd be grateful. By mocking my body in front of everyone I know? Robert shrugged. I simply told the truth. If you found that hurtful, perhaps you should have considered that before demanding a wedding. The gaslighting was so smooth it was almost impressive. Tom made a noise like he was about to step forward, but Abigail held up a hand, stopping him. Why are you here, Robert? To make you an offer. He gestured at the ruins of the barn. Unfortunate, what happened there. These dry seasons, fires just seem to start from nothing. That wasn't nothing. That was arson. Can you prove that? I mean, really prove it in a way that would hold up in court? He smiled. I thought not, which is why I'm here. I'm willing to drop all charges against you. I'll even compensate Mr. Boone here for his unfortunate losses. Shall we say $200? That should help rebuild. $200 won't replace that barn, Tom said. No, but it's more than you'll get otherwise. I'm being generous, considering Miss Harper stole from me. I didn't steal anything. I found proof that you've been defrauding ranchers for years. You have some receipts and ledgers that you've clearly misinterpreted. That's not proof of anything except your own ignorance of business practices. Robert's smile never wavered. But I'm willing to overlook your accusations. All you have to do is drop this crusade, return all documents to me, and leave this county. Simple. And if I don't, then the charges stand. You'll be convicted. And you will be convicted, Abigail. Let's not pretend otherwise. Judge Harrison is a reasonable man who understands the law. You'll go to jail. Your father's farm will go into foreclosure. And yes, I know about his debts. They're held by the bank I partially own. Mr. Boone will lose his ranch when no one will process his cattle. Everyone connected to this foolishness will suffer. He said it all so calmly, like he was discussing the weather. Or bitte, he continued, you take my offer. Leave quietly. Everyone moves on. No one else gets hurt. Abigail looked at him. This man she'd almost married, this man who'd destroyed her publicly and was now trying to destroy her privately. This man who genuinely seemed to believe he was being reasonable. No, she said. Robert's smile finally slipped. I'm sorry? I said no. I'm not leaving. I'm not dropping anything. And when the evidence gets published in Topeka, which it will, probably by tomorrow, everyone will know exactly what you've been doing. Topeka? For the first time, Robert looked uncertain. What are you talking about? We sent copies of everything to the state newspapers. They're running the story. You can threaten me, burn Caleb's buildings, pressure the local judge all you want, but you can't stop the truth from getting out now. The lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Calloway, if they've actually— Shut up! Robert's voice was sharp. He stared at Abigail. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to take that chance? For a long moment, Robert just looked at her. Then something changed in his face, the mask of civility dropping away to reveal something uglier underneath. You stupid woman, he said quietly. You have no idea what you've done, no idea what I'm capable of. I know exactly what you're capable of. You showed me in that church. You've shown me with every fire, every threat, every attempt to make me disappear. Abigail came down the porch steps, ignoring her screaming ankle, putting herself on level ground with him. But here's what you don't know about me. I'm done disappearing. You can burn every building on this ranch. You can drag me to court. You can do whatever you want. I'm still not backing down. Robert's hand moved toward his jacket. Tom's rifle came up immediately. Don't, Tom said flatly. Not unless you want to find out how fast I can shoot. The lawyer grabbed Robert's arm. Mr. Calloway, this isn't… We should go. We should go now. For a second, Abigail thought Robert might actually draw a weapon, might actually be reckless enough to escalate to violence right here in the open. Then he jerked his arm away from the lawyer and stepped back. This isn't over, he said. No, Abigail agreed. It's not. But when it is, you're going to lose, and everyone will know what you are. Robert and his lawyer mounted up and rode away fast enough to kick up dust. Abigail watched them go, her heart hammering, her hands shaking with adrenaline she couldn't release. That was dangerous, Tom said. I know. He's going to come back, and next time it won't be with offers. I know that too. Tom lowered his rifle and looked at her. You're really not going to back down, are you? No. Even if it costs you everything? Abigail thought about that. About what she had to lose, which wasn't much, really. A family that had been willing to trade her for debt relief. A reputation that was already destroyed. A future that had never really been hers to begin with. I don't have everything to lose, she said, but he does. And that's why I'm going to win. Caleb came back from Topeka 3 days later looking like he'd ridden through hell and barely made it out. His horse was lathered, his clothes were filthy, and there was a cut above his left eye that he hadn't bothered to bandage properly. Abigail was in the yard when he rode in. She'd been checking on the temporary shelter they'd rigged for the horses after the barn burned, trying to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral into all the ways this could still go wrong. When she saw him, she just stopped, relief hitting so hard it hurt. You made it, she said, which was stupid because obviously he'd made it. He was standing right there. Caleb dismounted stiffly. The Eagle is running the story tomorrow, front page. They're calling it the biggest fraud case in Kansas in 20 years. And they believed you? They didn't think it was just some local grudge? They believed the numbers. Hard to argue with documented theft when you lay it all out. He touched the cut on his forehead, winced. Calloway had people watching the newspaper office. I had to go in the back way. Nearly got caught twice. You're bleeding. I'm fine. But he swayed slightly as he said it. Tom appeared from the house and took one look at Caleb. You look like death. When's the last time you slept? Don't remember. What happened here? The barn's worse than when I left. Burned, Abigail said. 2 nights ago. Arson. We got the horses out, but we lost everything else. Caleb's jaw tightened. Calloway. Almost certainly. He came by yesterday with his lawyer, tried to buy us off. Threatened to destroy everyone if we didn't back down. What did you say? I told him no. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Of course you did. It didn't sound like criticism. It sounded like resignation mixed with something that might have been admiration. Come on, Tom said. Get inside before you fall down. Danny, take care of his horse. They got Caleb into the house and into a chair. Abigail brought water and clean cloth to deal with the cut on his head while Tom heated up the eternal pot of coffee that seemed to be the ranch's only consistent food source. Hold still, Abigail said, dabbing at the wound. Caleb flinched. Don't be a baby, says the woman who pulled a horse out of a burning barn with a sprained ankle. Who told you that? Tom, in detail. Including the part where you nearly got yourself killed. Abigail focused on cleaning the cut. The horse would have died. So would you have. That beam came down seconds after you got clear. But it didn't. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're… Caleb stopped, seemed to wrestle with something. You scare the hell out of me. You know that? Abigail's hand stilled. I scare you? Every time I turn around, you're doing something that could get you killed. Walking into the prairie alone, going through Calloway's records, running into burning buildings. You don't think about consequences, you just… I think about consequences constantly. I just don't let them stop me. She went back to cleaning the cut, more gently now. And you're one to talk. You rode to Topeka and back in 3 days with Calloway's men hunting you. That's different. How? Caleb didn't answer. Tom brought coffee and retreated to the other side of the room, making himself busy with paperwork in a way that was definitely not fooling anyone. The story breaks tomorrow, Caleb said finally. After that, everything changes. Calloway won't be able to just make this disappear. There'll be federal investigators, audits, probably criminal charges. He'll fight it. Of course he'll fight it, but he'll be fighting in public now, and men like Calloway don't do well when they can't control the narrative. Caleb took a drink of coffee. The question is, what happens between now and then? He's got maybe 12 hours before that paper hits the streets in Topeka. After that, it'll spread to every town in Kansas within a week. 12 hours for him to do something desperate, Abigail said. Yeah. Tom looked up from his paperwork that he definitely wasn't reading. We should prepare for trouble. Set watches, keep the rifles loaded. Already done, Danny said from the doorway. Got the boys organized. We're doing 4-hour shifts, 2 men at a time. Abigail felt a rush of gratitude for these men who'd gone from barely tolerating her presence to organizing armed watches to protect her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Danny said. We don't know what's coming. What came was worse than any of them expected. The fire started just after midnight, not at the ranch, in town. The Abilene Land Office, the building that held all the property records and deed registries for the county. By the time anyone noticed, the whole structure was engulfed. They heard about it at dawn when a rider came out from town, one of the ranchers Abigail had interviewed, a man named Cooper, who looked like he'd been awake all night. The land office burned, he said without preamble. Everything's gone, every deed, every property record, every survey map. 30 years of documentation just gone. Abigail felt her stomach drop. When? Sometime after midnight. Fire department couldn't save it. The clerk who keeps the records is saying it was an accident, a lamp that got knocked over, but Cooper looked at her. We all know it wasn't an accident. Calloway, Caleb said flatly. Has to be. Thing is, without those records, nobody can prove who owns what. Including you, Miss Harper. Your father's deed, any claim he has to his land, it's gone. And I'd bet money that Calloway has copies of his own deed somewhere safe. Tom swore. He's making it so he can claim anything he wants. Without the official records, who's going to stop him? The state capitol has copies, Abigail said, thinking fast. They have to, some kind of backup system. Sure, in Topeka, which will take weeks to access, maybe months to verify and reissue. And in the meantime, Cooper spread his hands. Nobody can prove ownership of anything. Calloway can move in on any property he wants, claim he has the valid deed, and who's going to challenge him without records to back it up? It was brilliant in a horrible way. Destroy the evidence of his fraud while simultaneously destroying everyone's ability to prove they owned their own land. Create chaos, and then exploit it. There has to be something we can do, Abigail said. There is. Everyone turned to look at Tom. We go to town. All of us. Every rancher who's been robbed, every hand who's willing to stand up. We go to the sheriff's office and we demand action, not requests, demands. Arrest Calloway before he can do any more damage. Porter won't do it, Caleb said. He's too deep in Calloway's pocket. Then we go over his head, directly to the federal marshal. Cooper, how many ranchers can you round up? Maybe 20? Maybe more if we move fast. Do it. Tell them to meet at my ranch in 2 hours. Armed but not looking for a fight. We're not vigilantes, we're citizens demanding the law be enforced. Cooper nodded and rode off. Tom started organizing the hands, making sure everyone understood this was about pressure, not violence. And Caleb pulled Abigail aside. You need to stay here, he said. Absolutely not. Abby, you're under bond. You can't leave the county, remember? Porter sees you in town making demands. He'll throw you in jail immediately. Then I'll go to jail, but I'm not hiding while everyone else fights my fight. This isn't just your fight anymore. You made it everyone's fight when you exposed the fraud. Now, let other people carry some of the weight. Abigail wanted to argue. Every instinct said she should be there, should be visible, should face this head on. But Caleb was right. Her presence would give Porter an easy excuse to arrest her and derail everything. Fine, she said, but if this goes wrong, if it goes wrong, we'll figure it out. We always do. He said it with such certainty, like figuring things out was just something that happened naturally instead of through exhausting effort and constant improvisation. Abigail almost believed him. They left an hour later. Caleb, Tom, Danny, and 3 other hands, meeting up with a growing group of ranchers who'd heard what was happening and decided they were done being quiet. By the time they rode into Abilene, they were 30 strong, a column of angry men on horseback moving down the main street like an army. Abigail watched them go from the porch, then went inside and tried to focus on something, anything that would keep her from imagining all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. She was going through the remaining financial records, copies of the copies they'd made, the backup insurance against everything being destroyed, when she heard horses approaching. Too soon for Caleb to be back. Wrong direction, too, coming from the south instead of from town. Abigail went to the window and felt her blood go cold. Robert Calloway was riding toward the ranch with at least a dozen men, and this time they weren't bothering with pretense. These were hired guns, the kind of men who got paid to intimidate and hurt people. Several had rifles visible. All of them looked like they knew how to use them. She was alone. Every hand who could fight had gone to town with Caleb. The only person left on the ranch besides her was old Pete, the cook, who was half-blind and couldn't shoot worth a damn. Abigail grabbed the rifle Tom had left leaning by the door and stepped out onto the porch. Her ankle throbbed. She'd been on it too much the past few days and it was protesting, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. Calloway reined up about 20 feet from the porch. He looked different than he had at the church, harder and meaner, like he'd stopped pretending to be civilized and let the ugliness show through. "Miss Harper," he said. "All alone?" "What do you want, Robert?" "I want those documents. All of them. Every copy, every ledger, every piece of paper you stole from me." "I didn't steal anything from you, and even if I gave you the documents, it's too late. The story's already out." "The Topeka paper?" Robert laughed. "Funny thing about newspapers, sometimes they have accidents. Printing press breaks down, whole run gets destroyed before it hits the street. Unfortunate, but these things happen." Abigail felt ice in her chest. "You can't. I can do whatever I want. I've been doing it for years. The only difference now is you forced me to be less subtle about it." He dismounted and his men followed suit. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me every scrap of evidence you have. Then you're going to sign a statement saying you made everything up, that you were a scorned woman trying to hurt me out of spite." "I'm not signing anything." "Yes, you are. Because if you don't—" He gestured at the ranch buildings. "Well, you've seen how easily things burn. Be a shame if this whole place went up, with you inside." "You're threatening to murder me." "I'm offering you a choice. Sign the statement, give me the documents, and you get to walk away. Refuse, and—" He shrugged. "Accidents happen. Tragic story, really. Woman goes mad with rejection, sets fire to the ranch where she was staying, dies in the blaze. Who could have predicted such a thing?" Abigail's hands were shaking on the rifle. She was outnumbered 12-1. Even if she was the best shot in Kansas, which she wasn't, she couldn't stop all of them. And Robert knew it. That's why he'd come now, while Caleb was gone, while she was vulnerable. "I need time to think," she said. "You have about 10 seconds. "I need to get the documents. They're hidden. I can't just—" Robert studied her face. "You're stalling. I'm trying not to get killed. Give me 5 minutes to get the papers and I'll bring them out. You can watch the door. Make sure I don't run." It was a terrible plan. She had no plan. But 5 minutes was better than 10 seconds. Robert seemed to come to the same conclusion. "Fine, 5 minutes. But if you're not back out here with everything, we start burning buildings, starting with this one." Abigail backed into the house, keeping the rifle pointed toward the door until she was inside. Then she moved fast. The documents were in a metal box under the floorboards in Caleb's room, the originals, the ones they hadn't sent to Topeka or stored elsewhere. She pulled them out, looked at them. 3 years of work. Proof of systematic fraud. The thing that could actually stop Robert Calloway. She couldn't give them to him. But she also couldn't fight 12 armed men. Think. The back window in Caleb's room looked out toward the creek. If she could get out, get to the trees, maybe she could hide until what? Until Caleb came back and found the ranch burned and her dead or disappeared? No. Running meant letting Robert destroy everything. Again. Abigail looked around the room, at the sparse furniture and practical organization that was so completely Caleb. Saw the shelf with his few books, his extra clothes, his rifle cleaning kit. His life lived simply and honestly, now being threatened because he'd helped her. She'd brought this to his door. Her fight, her choices, his consequences. Something hardened in her chest. She grabbed a box of matches from the kitchen, the kerosene lamp from the table, and went back to Caleb's room. Opened the window as quietly as she could, took one of his shirts from the peg on the wall, wrapped the documents in it along with one of the ledgers that would burn hot and fast. Then she climbed out the window. Her ankle screamed. She bit down on the pane and moved toward the creek, staying low, using the buildings as cover. If Robert's men were watching the back, they'd see her, but they seemed focused on the front door, waiting for her to emerge. She made it to the tree line, found a hollow near the water, and did something that felt completely insane. She built a fire, small, controlled, using dried leaves and small branches. Got it burning steady. Then she unwrapped the documents and the ledger and held them over the flames. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one. To Caleb, maybe. To everyone who'd helped gather this evidence. To herself for what she was about to do. Then she let the papers catch fire. She didn't burn everything. That would be stupid. She burned enough to create ash, to create the appearance of destruction. Kept the most damning pages, the ones with the clearest proof, and shoved them inside her shirt against her skin. The rest she let burn to ash, then scattered the remains in the creek. By the time she limped back to the house, front door this time, like she'd been inside the whole time, she looked defeated, exhausted, broken. Robert was pacing on the porch. "Time's up." "They're gone," Abigail said. Her voice came out hollow. "Perfect." "What?" "The documents. I burned them." She held up her soot-stained hands. "You wanted them gone?" "They're gone." Robert stared at her. "You're lying. Check the house. Check anywhere you want. They're burned. Ash. You win." For a moment, Robert looked triumphant, then suspicious. "Why would you do that?" "Because you were going to kill me anyway. At least this way you don't get what you want. At least this way when they investigate your fraud, and they will, the story's still getting out from Topeka, you won't be able to claim I fabricated everything because the evidence is gone. It becomes your word against mine. And maybe I go down, but you're going down with me." It was just believable enough. Spite over self-preservation. The last act of defiance from a woman who had nothing left to lose. Robert's face went through several expressions: anger, calculation, uncertainty. "You stupid! You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done. Same thing I did in that church. I chose to burn it all down rather than let you have it." "Boss." One of Robert's men was watching the road. Riders coming, a lot of them. Everyone turned. In the distance, dust was rising, a large group on horseback, heading toward the ranch at speed. Robert swore. "It's Boone, and half the damn county from the look of it." "Guess they're done in town," Abigail said. "You should probably leave before they get here. Unless you want to explain to 30 armed ranchers why you're on this property with hired guns." Robert looked at her with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." He signaled his men, and they mounted up fast, riding south away from the approaching column. Abigail watched them go, then sat down hard on the porch steps because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Caleb reached her first, dismounting before his horse even stopped moving. "What happened? We saw Calloway's men leaving." "I'm fine. He came for the documents. I told him I burned them." "Did you?" "Some of them. Not all." She pulled the hidden pages from her shirt. "The most important ones are right here." Caleb looked at the papers, then at her, then back at the papers. "You're insane." "Probably. Did it work in town?" "Porter arrested Calloway an hour ago. Federal marshal was already there. Someone from Topeka must have sent word ahead. They've got him on fraud charges, arson, attempted murder. It's done." The relief was so intense it felt like drowning. "It's really done?" "The legal part's just starting. But the part where Calloway controls everything? Yeah, that's done." Ranchers were dismounting all around them, talking in excited voices about the arrest, about what it meant, about finally having someone in power who'd listen. Tom was giving orders about securing the ranch, making sure Calloway's men didn't come back. Danny was already checking the buildings for damage. And Caleb was still standing there looking at Abigail like he couldn't decide whether to yell at her or something else entirely. "You scared me," he said quietly. "When we saw his men here and you were alone." "I know. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. You don't get to apologize for being brave, even when it's stupid." He sat down next to her on the steps. "The town's a mess. Half the businesses are shutting down until they can verify ownership without the land records. People are angry, scared. It's going to take months to sort out." "But they'll sort it out." "Yeah, they will." He was quiet for a moment. Your father's farm, without the deed on record, he's vulnerable. Anyone could try to claim it. Abigail had been trying not to think about that. I know. I could help. My ranch is documented in Topeka. I verified it while I was there. I could extend a loan against my property, help your father hold on to his land until the records get reissued. Why would you do that? Caleb looked at her like it was the stupidest question he'd ever heard. Because it matters to you, and because... He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. Because you matter to me. More than is probably smart or convenient. Abigail's heart did something complicated. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm saying if you need help, it's there. For you, for your family, whatever you need. That's not nothing. That's not asking for nothing. Then what is it? Abigail looked at this man who'd found her broken in a creek bed, who'd given her shelter when she had nowhere to go, who'd believed her about the fraud when he could have just as easily thrown her out, who'd ridden to Topeka through danger to get her story told, who was offering to save her father's farm, not because he wanted something from her, but because he wanted her to have what she needed. It's the nicest thing anyone's ever offered me, she said honestly, but I can't accept it, not like this. Why not? Because I spent my whole life being something for other people. The daughter who'd marry well to save the farm. The woman who'd be small enough to be acceptable. I can't go from that to being someone you rescue. I need to stand on my own first. Figure out who I am when I'm not trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. Caleb was quiet for a long time, then, okay. Okay? Yeah, okay, you want to stand on your own, stand on your own. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. Standing alone means nobody helps you. Standing on your own means you make your own choices. But people who care about you get to be there while you do it. He stood up, offered her his hand. So how about this? I help your father keep his farm, not as a loan to you, as a business arrangement with him. You pay me back when you can, no pressure. And you stay here at the ranch as long as you want, working the books like you've been doing. Fair wages for fair work. No charity, no rescue, just employment. Abigail looked at his offered hand. What if I want more than that eventually? Then we'll figure it out when eventually gets here. Right now seems like we've got enough to deal with without adding complicated to the list. She took his hand and let him pull her up. That's probably the smartest thing you've said all day. Don't get used to it. The next few weeks were chaos. Federal investigators descended on Abilene, auditing every business Calloway had touched. The legal proceedings dragged on as lawyers fought over evidence and jurisdiction. The land office situation got worse before it got better, with multiple claims on the same properties and no clear way to resolve them without the original records. But slowly, things started settling. Abigail went home to see her family, endured her mother's tears and her father's awkward attempts at apology for almost trading her to Calloway for debt relief. Her sister Sarah hugged her so tight it hurt and whispered, "You're the bravest person I know," into her ear. Caleb made good on his promise, arranging a loan that kept her father's farm operating until the deed situation got resolved. Abigail insisted on drawing up a proper contract with repayment terms, treating it like the business arrangement Caleb had suggested instead of charity. She went back to the ranch and settled into the work of keeping the books, managing the accounts, slowly helping rebuild what had been damaged. The hand stopped calling her the church lady and started calling her boss, which Tom said was a sign of respect, but Abigail suspected was partly teasing. She bought fabric in town, blue, because she'd always liked blue, and sewed herself a dress that actually fit her body instead of trying to hide it. The women who'd whispered about her at the wedding watched her walk down the street in that dress, and some of them looked away, ashamed. Some of them nodded. One of them, a woman named Elizabeth, who ran the general store, stopped her on the street. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Elizabeth said, "for not speaking up. When Calloway humiliated you, I should have said something." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid of being next. Afraid of being seen as difficult." Elizabeth twisted her hands together. "But watching you fight back, watching you refuse to disappear, it made me realize being afraid is no excuse for being complicit." Other women started coming forward with similar sentiments. Quietly at first, then more openly. Women who'd been diminished by their husbands, by the town, by the same system that had tried to break Abigail. They didn't all become friends. Some were too damaged by years of silence. some too proud to admit they'd been wrong. But there was a shift happening, something fragile and new. 3 months after the arrest, Judge Harrison was removed from the bench for corruption. Sheriff Porter resigned before he could be fired. Robert Calloway was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for fraud, with additional charges pending for arson and attempted murder. The ranchers he'd stolen from received partial restitution, not everything they'd lost, but enough to help them rebuild. Caleb's ranch started showing profit for the first time in years. Tom bought a small property on the eastern edge of the county with his savings, planning to start his own operation. And Abigail bought land, 20 acres adjacent to Caleb's ranch, with a small house that needed work but had good bones. She bought it with money she'd saved from her wages, plus a loan from the bank that was no longer controlled by Calloway's interests. Her name on the deed, her property, her choice. Caleb helped her move in, along with half the ranch hands who'd apparently decided this was a group project. They fixed the leaking roof, replaced the broken windows, cleared the land that had gone wild from neglect. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked as they stood on the porch of her new house, watching the sun set over land that belonged to her. "About buying my own place? Yes. About being my neighbor instead of something else." Abigail looked at him. Over the past months, she'd learned his silences, his tells, the way he got quiet when he was trying not to say too much. She'd learned he was kind without being soft, honest without being cruel, steady in ways that had nothing to do with being boring. She'd learned she was maybe falling in love with him, which was terrifying and wonderful, and completely different from what she'd felt about Robert Calloway, which hadn't been love at all but desperation dressed up as hope. "Ask me properly," she said. "What?" "If you want something else, ask me properly. Not in the middle of chaos, not when I'm still figuring out who I am. Ask me when we're both standing on solid ground." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, small and real. "All right, but when I do ask, you have to promise not to say yes just because it's practical or because you think you owe me something." "I promise." "You have to promise not to ask unless you mean it." "Deal." They shook on it like business partners, which made Danny laugh from where he was fixing the fence line. The sun kept setting, the land kept existing, and Abigail Harper stood on her own porch, on her own land, wearing a dress she'd made herself, and felt something she'd never quite felt before. She felt like herself, completely, unapologetically herself. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The Sunday it all changed started like any other Sunday, which meant it didn't start easy. Abigail was on her own porch trying to fix a loose board that had been driving her crazy for 2 weeks when she heard the wagon. She looked up, hammer still in hand, and saw her sister Sarah driving up the road with their mother beside her. This was unusual. Their mother hadn't spoken to Abigail directly since she'd moved to her own property, communicating instead through Sarah in a way that was supposed to be subtle, but mostly just felt petty. The fact that she was here, in person, meant something had happened. Abigail set down the hammer and waited. Sarah pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, but their mother stayed seated, hands folded in her lap like she was attending a funeral. "What's wrong?" Abigail asked. "Nothing's wrong exactly," Sarah said. "Mama wanted to see you, to talk." Their mother finally looked at Abigail, and there was something in her face that Abigail had never quite seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, something softer and more complicated. "I've been thinking," her mother said quietly, "about what I said to you before the wedding." Abigail remembered that I was lucky, that you were lucky Robert Calloway wanted to marry you, that we were all lucky. Her mother's voice was tight. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air like something fragile. "You don't have to," Abigail started. "Yes, I do. I do have to say it." Her mother climbed down from the wagon, moving stiffly like her joints hurt. She'd gotten older in the past few months, or maybe Abigail was just noticing it for the first time. "I told you to be grateful for a man who publicly humiliated you. I told you to make yourself smaller so you'd be acceptable. I taught you that your value came from what men were willing to tolerate about you." "Mama, Imam, sis." "And when you refused, when you walked away from that church, I was ashamed of you. I thought you'd ruined everything." Her mother's eyes were wet. "But you didn't ruin anything. You saved yourself, and probably saved your father's farm too, though he's too proud to admit it outright." Abigail didn't know what to say. Apologies from her mother were rare enough to feel like weather events. "I don't know how to be the kind of mother you needed," her mother continued. "I only know how to be the kind I was taught to be. Quiet, accommodating, making sure my daughters knew how to survive by being small enough not to threaten anyone." "You were trying to protect us," Abigail said. "I was trying to protect you from the world by teaching you to protect men from yourselves. That's not the same thing." Her mother reached out, hesitated, then took Abigail's hand. "I'm proud of you. I should have said it months ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you for refusing to disappear." Sarah was crying openly. Abigail felt her own throat get tight. "Thank you," she managed. They stood there for a moment, three women on a porch in the middle of nowhere, finally saying things that should have been said years ago. "There's something else," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Mama isn't the only one who wants to talk to you. There are women in town they've been asking about you, about what you did, how you did it." "I didn't do anything special. I just refused to accept what everyone said was inevitable. That's what they want to know about, how to refuse." Sarah glanced at their mother, who nodded slightly. "Elizabeth from the general store has been asking, and Martha, who runs the boarding house. Even some of the younger women who are engaged or newly married. They want to know how to stand up without losing everything." "I almost lost everything." "But you didn't, and that's what matters." Sarah grabbed Abigail's other hand. "Would you talk to them? Just share what you learned?" Abigail thought about all the women who'd watched her get destroyed in that church and said nothing. Thought about the ones who'd whispered behind her back, who judged her for taking up too much space. But she also thought about Elizabeth's apology on the street, about the quiet nods she'd been getting, about the way change happened, slowly, imperfectly, one conversation at a time. "All right," she said. "I'll talk to them." It started small. 6 women gathered at Abigail's house the following Sunday afternoon, perched nervously on chairs and crates in her front room. Elizabeth was there, and Martha, and Sarah, and 3 younger women whose names Abigail was still learning. They brought food, the universal language of women gathering, and for the first 20 minutes they mostly just ate and made small talk about the weather. Then Martha, who was probably 60 and had buried 2 husbands, said, "So how did you do it?" "Do what?" "Stand in front of Robert Calloway and tell him no. When he had all the power and you had nothing." Abigail thought about that church, about the creek bed, about standing on Caleb's porch while Calloway threatened to burn everything, about all the moments when she'd been terrified and done it anyway. "I didn't have nothing," she said finally. "I had the truth. And I had people who believed me, even when believing me was dangerous for them. But mostly I just decided that being destroyed on my own terms was better than being diminished on someone else's." One of the younger women, Anna, married 3 months to a rancher who was twice her age, spoke up quietly. "My husband says I can't visit my sister anymore. Says she's a bad influence because she has opinions." The room went very quiet. "What do you want to do?" Abigail asked. "I want to see my sister. But if I disobey him, he'll—" Anna stopped, looked down at her hands. "He'll what?" Martha's voice was sharp. "I don't know. Nothing violent. He's not like that. But he'll be disappointed. He'll tell me I'm not being a good wife." "And you believe him?" Elizabeth asked. "Don't you believe your husband when he says things like that?" Elizabeth laughed, bitter. "Every day, but I'm starting to think believing them is the problem." They talked for 2 hours, about the small ways they'd learned to make themselves smaller, about the things they'd given up to keep peace, about the difference between compromise and erasure. Some of it was heavy, some of it was surprisingly funny, and all of it felt like pressure releasing from a valve that had been stuck closed for years. When they left, Anna pulled Abigail aside. "I'm going to see my sister next week. I'm just going to do it. And if my husband is disappointed, he can be disappointed." "Good," Abigail said. "I'm terrified." "Yeah, but you're doing it anyway. That's what courage is." The gatherings became regular. Every Sunday, sometimes more women, sometimes fewer. They didn't solve everything. Problems that had been built over decades weren't going to disappear in weeks. But women started making different choices. Small ones at first. Visiting sisters. Buying fabric they liked instead of what was cheapest. Speaking up in church meetings. Anna's husband was indeed disappointed. He also, eventually, got over it when he realized his wife visiting her sister didn't actually harm him in any way. Progress was slow and messy and imperfect. But it was progress. Caleb watched all of this from the edge, never quite joining the gatherings, but always aware of them happening. One evening, he and Abigail were sitting on her porch, something they'd started doing regularly, just existing in each other's space without it needing to mean anything specific. "You're starting something," he said. "I'm just talking to people. You're doing more than that. You're showing them they don't have to accept what they've always accepted." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, some of the men in town are getting nervous about it. Let them be nervous. They'll survive. Some of them are saying you're causing trouble between husbands and wives." Abigail laughed. "I'm not causing anything. I'm just refusing to pretend that the way things are is the way things have to be. If that troubles them, that's their problem to solve." Caleb smiled. "You scare people. You know that?" "You've mentioned it before. I mean it as a compliment." "I know you do." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. This had become their routine. Work during the day, sometimes together if the ranch books needed attention, sometimes separate if Abigail was managing her own property. Then evenings on the porch, talking or not talking, just being. It felt solid, real. Nothing like the desperate arrangement she'd almost made with Robert Calloway. "I've been thinking," Caleb said after a while. "Dangerous habit. About what you said. About asking you properly when we're both on solid ground." Abigail's heart did something complicated. And I think maybe we're there. Maybe we've been there for a while, and I've just been waiting for the right moment." He turned to look at her. "But the thing is, I don't think there's a right moment. There's just moments, and this one's as good as any." "Caleb, let me finish." He took a breath. "I love you. Not because you're convenient or practical or because you're good with the books, though you are all those things. I love you because you're stubborn and brave and you refuse to make yourself smaller for anyone. I love you because you ran into a burning barn to save a horse, because you stood up to a powerful man when everyone else was too scared, because you take up exactly the amount of space you occupy and you don't apologize for it." Abigail felt tears starting and tried to stop them. Failed. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Caleb continued. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I'm asking if you want to build something together. A life, a partnership. Something where we're equals and neither of us has to be less than we are to make it work." "That's basically a proposal," Abigail said, her voice thick. "Yeah, I guess it is. But it's a different kind. Not be my wife and fit into the space I've made for you. More like, let's make space together and see what we can build in it." Abigail wiped her eyes. "That's the best non-proposal I've ever heard." "Is that a yes?" "It's a, let me think about it for 5 seconds so I don't seem too eager." She counted silently. "Okay, yes. Yes, I want to build something with you." Caleb grinned and it transformed his whole face. That was only 3 seconds. I got impatient. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like he was still learning what she needed, and Abigail kissed him back and thought about how different this was from anything she'd imagined. Better. More real. More hers. When they pulled apart, Caleb said, "So what now?" "Now we figure it out as we go, like we've been doing." "That's not much of a plan." "No, but it's honest." The announcement of their engagement, when they finally made it official 3 months later, surprised exactly no one. The wedding planning, however, caused some tension. "We could do it in the church," Sarah suggested. They were in Abigail's house, the Sunday gathering having evolved into something that was part support group, part social club, part wedding planning committee. "Absolutely not," Abigail said. "I'm not getting married in the place where I was publicly humiliated." "What about outside?" Martha suggested. "There's that big cottonwood tree on your property. It's pretty." "Too hot," Elizabeth said. "It's July. Everyone will die." "Everyone won't die from heat at a wedding," Anna protested. "You want to bet? I've seen grown men pass out standing in the sun for 20 minutes. They bickered good-naturedly while Abigail half listened, sketching rough plans for a dress. She was making her own again, blue, because she still loved blue, but a different style this time, something that felt like celebration instead of apology. Her mother, who'd become a regular at these gatherings in a way that was still slightly awkward but getting easier, spoke up. "What matters is what you want, Abigail, not what's traditional or expected. What do you actually want?" Abigail looked at her mother, surprised. 6 months ago, That question would have been followed by suggestions about what she should want. Now it was just a question. I want something small, Abigail said. Just family and friends. No spectacle, no performance. I want to marry Caleb under that cottonwood tree, and I want to wear a dress I made myself, and I want my father to walk me down the aisle, not to give me away, but to celebrate that I belong to myself. Then that's what we'll do, her mother said simply. Planning a wedding turned out to be complicated, even when you were trying to keep it simple. There were logistics and details and 100 small decisions that Abigail hadn't considered. But the women helped, and Caleb helped in his own way by staying mostly out of it, except when directly asked, and slowly it came together. The bigger surprise was the men. Tom showed up at Abigail's place 2 weeks before the wedding with Danny and 3 other ranch hands carrying tools. We're building you a proper barn, Tom announced. The temporary shelter is fine for now, but you need something better. Wedding present. You don't have to... We want to. You helped save this ranch, helped get us fair pay, helped Tom buy his own property. Let us do this. They spent the next 2 weeks building, and other ranchers started showing up to help. The ones Abigail had interviewed, the ones who'd gotten restitution from Calloway's fraud. They came with lumber and nails and labor, building something solid. Henry Watts, the first rancher Abigail had visited, pulled her aside one afternoon. I never thanked you properly for what you did, for caring enough to fight when you didn't have to. I did have to, Abigail said. Maybe not for you specifically, but for the principle of it. Still, thank you. He looked uncomfortable, like gratitude didn't come naturally. My wife asked me to tell you she's sorry she wasn't kinder to you when you came to our house. She was scared I'd be angry about the investigation, scared of change. Is she still scared? Less so. She's been talking to your mother and some of the other women, starting to speak up more at home. He smiled slightly. I'm trying to listen better. It's a work in progress. That's all any of us can do. Try to be better than we were. By the time the wedding day arrived, Abigail had a new barn, a completed dress, and a sense of calm that felt almost surreal. The morning of the wedding, she woke up early and just sat on her porch watching the sunrise over land that belonged to her. Sarah came by mid-morning to help her get ready, along with their mother and half a dozen other women who'd become something like friends over the past months. How do you feel? Sarah asked as she helped pin Abigail's hair. Ready, nervous, happy. Abigail looked at herself in the small mirror. The blue dress fit perfectly because she'd made it for her actual body instead of some idealized version. Her hair was simple, no elaborate styling. She looked like herself. I feel like myself. You look beautiful, her mother said, and there were tears in her eyes. Mama, don't start crying yet. We haven't even left the house. I'll cry if I want to. It's a mother's right. The ceremony was set for late afternoon when the heat would start breaking. Abigail walked from her house to the cottonwood tree on Caleb's property. Their property, really, since the line between his ranch and her land had become increasingly blurred. Her father met her halfway, offered his arm. You sure about this? He asked. More sure than I've been about anything. He's a good man, steady, honest. I know. Her father was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I tried to push you toward Calloway. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting the family, but I was protecting myself at your expense. I know. I forgive you. You shouldn't forgive me so easily. I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for me. Holding on to anger just makes everything heavier. Abigail squeezed his arm. But if you really want to make amends, treat Mama better. Listen to her. She has opinions worth hearing. Her father looked surprised, then thoughtful. You've gotten bold. I've always been bold. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. The gathering under the cottonwood tree was small, maybe 40 people total. Ranch hands and neighbors, the women from the Sunday gatherings, Caleb's few relatives who'd traveled from the eastern part of the state. No elaborate decorations, just the tree and the late afternoon light filtering through the leaves. Caleb stood waiting, and when he saw Abigail, his face did something that made her heart stutter. He looked at her like she was exactly what he wanted, exactly as she was. The ceremony itself was simple. A local minister who'd replaced the one who'd presided over the disastrous almost wedding with Robert Calloway. Simple vows, honestly spoken. When it came time for her father to present her, he did something unexpected. Instead of the traditional "who gives this woman," He said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Nobody gives this woman. She belongs to herself, but her family supports this union and celebrates her choice. There was a moment of surprised silence. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread until everyone was clapping, and Abigail's father looked uncomfortable with the attention, but also pleased. Caleb took her hands. You ready for this? For what? Marriage? Partnership? Building something together? All of it. Yeah, I'm ready. The kiss, when it came, was sweet and brief and perfect. When they turned to face everyone, Abigail saw tears on multiple faces. Her mother was crying openly. Sarah was beaming. The ranch hands were trying to look tough and mostly failing. And standing in the back, watching with an expression Abigail couldn't quite read, was Elizabeth from the general store. She caught Abigail's eye and nodded once, firm. A recognition of what this moment meant, not just for Abigail, but for every woman who was watching and thinking maybe, just maybe, she could choose something different too. The celebration afterward was simple: food and music and people talking too loud and laughing. Danny had brought his fiddle and was playing dance tunes that were more enthusiastic than skilled. Kids ran around between the adults. The sun set in shades of orange and purple. Abigail was standing a little apart from the crowd, just watching, when Tom approached. You did good, he said. I got married. That's not exactly revolutionary. That's not what I meant. I meant you changed things. The ranch is profitable again because you found the fraud. Multiple families kept their land because you fought for them. Women in town are starting to speak up because you showed them how. He looked uncomfortable, like compliments didn't come naturally. You did good. I just did what needed doing. Most people don't. They see what needs doing and they look the other way because it's safer. You didn't. Abigail felt emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, Tom. He nodded and walked away before things could get more awkward. Caleb appeared at her elbow a moment later. You all right? He asked. More than all right. I'm thinking about how strange this all is. 6 months ago, I was standing in a church being publicly destroyed. Now I'm here, married to you, on land I own, surrounded by people who respect me. She turned to look at him. It doesn't feel real sometimes. It's real. You made it real by refusing to accept what everyone said was inevitable. I had help. Yeah, but you had to be willing to accept it. A lot of people would have walked into that prairie and just kept walking until they disappeared. Caleb pulled her close. I'm glad you didn't. Me too. They stood there as the party continued around them, as the light faded and someone lit lanterns, as the music shifted to something slower and couples started dancing. We should probably join them, Caleb said. Probably. But Abigail didn't move yet. She was looking at the scene in front of her, her sister dancing with one of the ranch hands, her parents talking quietly in a way that looked almost peaceful, the women from her Sunday gatherings laughing together, the men who'd helped build her barn comparing notes on construction. This was her community now. Not given to her by birth or marriage, but built by her through choice and effort and the willingness to stand up when standing up was hard. It wasn't perfect. There were still people in town who thought she was too bold, too difficult, too much. There were still systems that would try to diminish her. There would still be fights ahead, for her rights, for her autonomy, for the simple ability to exist without apology. But she wasn't alone anymore, and she wasn't afraid. All right, she said to Caleb, let's dance. They joined the others under the cottonwood tree, and Abigail danced in her blue dress that fit her perfectly, on land that carried her name, beside a man who loved her exactly as she was. She danced and laughed and lived loudly in a world that had tried so hard to make her quiet. And somewhere in that moment, spinning in Caleb's arms with fireflies starting to appear in the dusk and music filling the air, Abigail understood something fundamental. Survival wasn't about becoming smaller so the world could tolerate you. It wasn't about fitting into spaces that were never designed for you in the first place. It wasn't about accepting cruelty as inevitable or diminishment as the price of peace. Survival was about refusing to disappear. It was about standing in the full measure of your space and saying, this is who I am, and I'm not apologizing for it. It was about building community with other people who were also done shrinking. It was about choosing yourself, even when choosing yourself was the hardest, scariest, most uncertain option available. It was about understanding that you were never too much. The spaces that couldn't hold you were simply too small. The music played on. The night deepened, and Abigail Harper Boone, who'd been abandoned at an altar, who'd nearly died in a creek bed, who'd exposed fraud and survived fires and stared down powerful men who wanted her erased, danced under the stars, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found something more valuable than acceptance. She had found herself, and she was never, ever letting go.